of Austria today. And that's not good. I'm absolutely against it. And so this is what we need to change
Yeah,
in Austria,
yeah,
if we can.
yeah.
That would be very good.
Yes, yeah. If I need to look at this, I didn't know.
When it comes to the future of Russia, I'm advocating 41 new states and Chechnya to be free.
Yeah,
And I'm seeing some people say I'm a bit radical in my position. But can you imagine a future where the Europeans would have recognized independent Chechnya in the 1990s and then defended it when Putin started his war in 99? And then we would have a much better reality because we were on the side of freedom and we had defended Chechnya as an independent country. Putin would have lost this war and not will be on the rise, and 25 years of history would have been much better.
that sounds beautiful. Yeah.
Not many of the things I
Yeah,
propose,
yeah.
but your generation will have to implement it.
I think it's an interesting point that you're making with Russia as well, because I feel like we have an over reliance on our conventional deterrence vis-a-vis Russia. Um, our
Is
con
Russia really deterred from aggression?
No, it's our concept is if Russia invades NATO territory, there will be a conventional response from us, right? It means war between Europe and Russia, and this is our sort of only policy to deter Russian aggression against us. And I feel that's not enough. I feel people will always be scared of a total conventional war with Russia, and if that's your only policy to deter Russia, it's not strong, because Russia will always have this feeling that, okay, maybe European politics and European people will be too scared and they will prevent NATO from taking action. So they will always be able to gamble that we won't respond to an invasion of the Baltics, for example. So I feel like we need to have more tools to deter Russia, and I feel, and there has to be more investigation into this, but I feel that using these minorities, for example, these desires for independence, even Russian interest in Georgia, for example, that's a huge deterrent. If you do aggression against Baltics, you will have 3 independence movements in your country, and that would be, first of all, bigger threat to Russia, and it would kind of weaken the importance of this conventional deterrent, which I feel is kind of problematic for our societies still. So we need to explore new ways to counter Russia, sort of flexible ways that don't just all bank on one option. And I think that this multi-ethnic, multinational nature of Russia is an asset for Europe that we can use to deter Russia even more effectively. And we need to think about this. And I mean, it's a long way. We don't have the intelligence capabilities yet. Maybe we have to work together with the Americans. But I think that's definitely.
When I was in high school,
yeah,
we were protected by American nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And it was very unpopular, and a lot of young people were against the so-called double track that was the rearmament of Western Europe with the Pershing II, and it was the American rockets going to be stationed in Western Germany. And that was a huge protest movement from the so-called peace movement from 1982, 84, 86. But it was decisive to end the Soviet Union, because this arms race and the nuclear rearmament showed the Soviets that Reagan and Kohl and Thatcher will not be submitting to Soviet domination of Europe. And that's why they are my 3 heroes. Yeah? But now we have only 100 nuclear bombs left from the Americans in Western Europe and in Turkey and in Italy, and we are basically, the nuclear balance in Europe has completely shifted in favor of Russia. So are you for nuclear rearmament of Europe?
I think we have very, very few other choices if we want to stay free and outside of Russian blackmail. I mean, if you look at the situation, Russians have, I think, 2,500 nuclear warheads. The Americans roughly the same, but as you said, in Europe not so many anymore. The French have, I think, 250, and this is a massive imbalance for us. And if we cannot show the Russians that we are strong and we are able to defend ourselves and retaliate, then we basically have to capitulate. And in any conversation, relating to our previous point about with Russia, any negotiation in the future will be about how to best submit to Russia's aims, how to best submit Europe and create this weak Europe that Russia wants. But as I said before, nuclear deterrence, conventional deterrence, they cannot be the only tools that we rely on. Because in the end, when the decision comes whether to retaliate or not, when the Russians issue a nuclear threat, and you have to explain to your people, for a town in Estonia, I'm willing to go to nuclear war with Russia. It's a very difficult thing to explain. And the Russians know how difficult it is. And they know that we are democracies, and they know that we have to listen to people. And they will abuse this and use this. So we have to find other ways to impose costs on Russia, other ways to hurt them, so we can better control their behavior and hopefully become so strong that there can be a stable kind of situation in Eastern Europe where these countries are able to prosper and live in freedom.
When there is now a massive American armada assembling around Iran, and after this terrible massacres on the 8th of January, the Iranian leadership has killed 10,000 of people, and the Americans have now this intention possible to intervene, and the Europeans are basically doing nothing. Being on the sidelines completely, and some of them are in favor, others complain about the international law, and then there will be certainly many Europeans who are going to protest against American liberation of the Iranians. Where are you on this side, and what's your opinion about the current affairs around Iran?
I think the Iranian regime, they are obviously an enemy of Europe. We can see this not only in what they say, but also in what they do. Iranian drones are killing Ukrainian civilians. They also fly into EU countries, into Poland. We can see this. We know what they're doing. They also support all kinds of radical Islamic initiatives inside our own countries. They are on this side of weakening Europe. They also see that democracy and freedom and prosperity is their enemy, so they want to weaken us together with Russia and with China and with the North Koreans. So if the regime changes in Iran, that's a positive thing for us in Europe. It means an end, hopefully, to Iranian support to Russia. It means an end of all of this Islamist subversion of our societies. And it means probably a better Middle East. The issue that we have in Europe is that we cannot make sure that our interests are supported or protected in whatever happens after a military action by the Americans. We don't have the assets on the ground. We don't have the regional alliance structures to make sure that actually, if the Americans strike and if they remove the regime, what happens after is not worse for Europe, And the Americans have the luxury, they can go in there, they can take out the Ayatollahs, and they can go back to America. They have an ocean in between. Trump loves to say that. They have a beautiful big ocean in between. They can go back and he can celebrate his victory. And we in Europe, we're going to have to deal with the consequences. We're going to have to deal, if there's a civil war in Iran, where are the refugees going to go? They're going to go to Europe. If there's an even worse regime that blocks the Strait of Hormuz or the Red Sea, our trade, our economies are going to suffer the most. So we have to make sure that we support, this effort, that the Iran regime is removed. And I'm happy that the IRGC is now on the terrorist list. But we have to make sure that whatever happens, our core interests are protected. And right now, we don't have these capabilities. We can just look at the Americans and make a cross and then pray that whatever happens will be okay for Europe. And that's not a continent that I want to live in. I don't want to have to make a cross and look on, I want to be able to protect the people and to make sure that, our neighborhood is safe and stable so we can prosper in Europe.
So let's assume the Americans are now attacking and liberating Iran. That will bind a lot of capacities of the American naval assets. Yeah, they have now already 2 aircraft carriers. Luckily, they have I think 7 or 11 all over. But nevertheless, yeah, the safety of Taiwan depends on American protection. Now the Americans are putting everything into the Middle East. Luckily, not everything. But what would happen if Mr. Xi, who is seemingly determined to integrate and reunify Taiwan, what will happen if Mr. Xi will attack Taiwan, let's say in March, after the end of the New Year celebrations in China? He probably sees that the campaign in Iran is not going very good for the Americans because there's more resistance, and then he feels emboldened to act and to attack Taiwan. What European assets will we provide for the safety of Taiwan?
I think if he does that, it will be a very bad decision. I think it will be a mistake for China to do this, and I can explain why maybe.
Explain.
I travel to Taiwan almost every year, and every time when I'm there, I leave either happy and optimistic or depressed. Every time I have a different impression, because it's a volatile situation, and politics in Taiwan is also very volatile. But this time I left more optimistic. I had good conversations with lawmakers there as well, and some civil society activists and people engaged in this effort to protect Taiwan. And I kind of took 3 things away from it, and the third one unfortunately is already shaky. 3 kind of positive signs. The first is that Taiwan has successfully managed to build a military alliance across the first island chain. I think that, supported by the Americans, it is a strong alliance with Korea, with Japan especially. And the key component is Japan, because the new prime minister has already said that an aggression of China against Taiwan would go against Japan's fundamental national interest, which means this would allow the Japanese Navy and Army to intervene. So this alliance changes China's calculation, because they have to deal with different factors. They have to deal with the Japanese Navy, potentially with Koreans. So it makes the operation more complex and more difficult. So I was very encouraged by this, and also by the level of contact that exists between Japan and Taiwan. They talk all the time, they visit each other, the militaries. So it's a real strong cooperation that I had sort of underestimated before. The second is Taiwan's kind of self-strengthening. It depends on the attitude of a society when it comes to war is very important. And I mean, you've been to Ukraine before the full-scale invasion. The way people talked about the war, and how people didn't want to believe it is a possibility, right? And many people still voted for some pro-Russian people because they're afraid. Society moves slowly, and in Taiwan, I always had that feeling as well. People are scared. People don't want to provoke. But this time, I kind of encountered a different spirit. The way people in Taiwan, the politicians and these activists, the way they talked about China, it reminded me for the first time to the way people in Ukraine talk about Russia. And that is encouraging. So there's a clear understanding, okay, these are our enemies, they want to hurt us. And the Taiwanese government has also initiated very important steps to strengthen Taiwan. They have increased the military service from 4 months, it was like a summer camp, 2 months in summer you could do, to 1 year. They're increasing military spending, and they're protecting this information space. There's one of the most popular social medias in Taiwan was Little Red Book, which is an insane name for a social media. It's like Mao's Little Red Book, right? It comes from China, and young people in Taiwan were using it, many of them, and it's now banned for some fraud reasons. So they banned this, so it limits the amount of influence that China can wield in Taiwan. And these steps show us, and they show the world, that Taiwan takes this threat very seriously. And I was also kind of informed about the offensive capabilities that Taiwan has. It's a key difference to Ukraine. Taiwan has the missiles, it has the weapons to strike China. They can strike the whole kind of economic heartland of China in the south, which could impose huge costs on the Chinese economy and the Chinese people, and it's a good deterrent. And that's something, for example, Ukrainians never had. They never had this arsenal of missiles
They strike very
to strike
effectively.
Russia. Now they have drones, all made by themselves, but they didn't have this at the beginning of the invasion. So this is a difference, and Taiwan has this, and it's a positive thing for Taiwan security. And the third thing that when I was there, that was big, was the U.S. aid package, right? The U.S. was going to supply $11 billion worth of sell $11 billion worth of weapons to Taiwan. You know, Taiwan was going to become the second biggest HIMARS army. So they would have the second largest amount of HIMARS in the world if this aid package went through.
You better need the HIMARS in Ukraine to destroy the Russian energy.
We also need the HIMARS in Ukraine. That's obviously the problem that everybody depends on America because they have a finite amount of resources. But this aid package is now being questioned in this conversation between Trump and Xi Jinping. So this is why I was optimistic. I think Taiwanese society is strong. I think this alliance in the region is strong, and I thought that the American support was strong. The biggest danger to Taiwan is not a direct invasion. I think it's a political subversion, right? If they manage the Yanukovych scenario, you know, if they manage to use this fear and install a Chinese puppet as president, that is the end of Taiwan, and probably the preferred option for China. The other thing is, if these conversations between Trump and Xi Jinping continue, and Trump puts out a tweet or some doubt about U.S. support for Taiwan, which I think could happen, then the Chinese will use this to intimidate the Taiwanese. They will say, okay, America has left, you know, you're on your own. There's no one to protect you. And then they will use this to go to the first scenario, to the Yanukovych scenario. I think these two are extremely dangerous and the preferred options for China. The three military scenarios, like beheading of the government, like Venezuela scenario, very difficult to do. The total invasion of Taiwan, unbelievable military endeavor, also very difficult to do and very costly. And third, the blockade, which many people talk about now, I think is also very difficult because basically you're cutting off trade for the whole world, and you're cutting off 90%, for example, of Japanese exports and imports. So they will intervene. So this will draw everybody in, and the longer this lasts, the worse for China. So they will try to make it. They will try to make it short. So, but you know, just because the likelihood of success of a Chinese invasion or blockade is low, doesn't mean that, you know, the likelihood that Xi Jinping will do it is low, because you know how these dictators think. First of all, they don't have always the full picture. They don't have the right information, because especially Xi Jinping, maybe even worse than Putin, has purged everyone. So there's no one around him with his own brain anymore. It's very dangerous. It's actually more dangerous than if he had the correct information. And the second is that they're obsessed with their historic place. You know, they're obsessed with their legacy. They want to be immortal. They want the world to remember them forever. And then it doesn't matter whether you cause a big catastrophe or a big victory, as long as you're remembered and you have your place in history. You're fine. And that's what worries me, that Xi Jinping will make this mistake and invade Taiwan, cause a huge war and destruction for both sides.
Shall we as Europeans defend Taiwan?
Can we defend Taiwan? I'm not sure if we have the capabilities. The ideal scenario for me is that us Europeans, we can take on the burden of Russia ourselves. We can be strong as Europeans, and so that the Americans can focus their full might on the Pacific and defend Taiwan. That's the best thing we can do for Taiwan in Europe, is to be strong for ourselves and to become independent of the United States in our defense. This is the best gift Europe can give to the Taiwanese people, because then this will free up American resources for defense of Taiwan, which are dearly needed.
That's what I call all the time, that during the liberation of Iran, the Europeans should mobilize our troops and our resources to liberate Crimea.
Yeah.
That is the optimum scenario. Let's hope
Yes.
it will be implemented.
Yeah.
And of course, we should also recognize Taiwan. That's the other question. Do you think shall we recognize Taiwan and so provoke Communist China?
I think it's not necessary. The Taiwanese are not pushing for this either. The Taiwanese want the status quo to continue. You know, they are not obsessed with being recognized in the world. They want to have peace. They want to have freedom. They want to have democracy. They want to have prosperity. They're not looking for us to wave the Taiwanese flag. It's not their approach.
I always do that on my Twitter
Which
account.
of course much.
And I call Kosovo to recognize Taiwan and Taiwan to recognize Kosovo.
Yeah.
But both have not done that, unfortunately.
I think it would be great. I mean, I hope that someday that Taiwan can be recognized somehow. But at the moment, it is a sort of unnecessary provocation for China because the Chinese have built up this narrative. They're slaves of their own propaganda, right? That Taiwan is not independent, that Taiwan is weak, and Taiwan is part of China. They say it all the time. So when a provocation happens, they have to react irrationally strong because they have to protect this narrative, right? If you say something too much, you kind of become attached to it and you can't escape anymore. So if now, I don't know, Lithuania, for example, they made some closer ties with Taiwan and they invited some people over. The Chinese, they've stopped all trade with Lithuania for 1 year because they are paranoid and they're slaves of their propaganda. So I think the best solution for Taiwan, or the best thing Europeans can do for Taiwan now, is to be strong as Europeans to defend themselves against Russia and allow the Americans to defend Taiwan from China and to pursue closer ties with Taiwan, but not in terms of recognition, but economic cooperation. I mean, Taiwan is a hub for the chip industry, for AI. Even socially, have more exchanges, get Europeans travel to Taiwan to see what a beautiful place it is and what it has achieved. And kind of cultural ties.
Because I've never been to Taiwan and I'm interested. Is it similar level of civilization and development prosperity like in Austria, or is it more modern than Austria?
I mean, it depends on how you define modern. I have a question for you. What do you think was Taiwan's economic growth last year?
Actually, I didn't look up in the preparations, I'm sorry, but it was good, I guess.
It was 7.3%.
Yeah, that's very good. Austria, 0.
Yeah, so you can see it's doing extremely well. It's growing faster than China, which I think is always great.
What's the level of prosperity? I should have looked up, actually.
So GDP per capita is, I think, 35 to 40,000 euros.
So not exactly like Austria. We are at 55.
But it's now richer than Korea and Japan in terms of GDP per capita. Okay, so they've overtaken them.
It's also richer, much richer actually, double the wealth, because China, I see 15,000.
Yeah, it's double the wealth of China.
Imagine with
communism and faster growth.
The whole of China could be at 30,000
yes.
GDP.
Yes.
That would give the world another 20 trillion of GDP in our 115 trillion GDP economy. Imagine that.
Yes, would be so great.
Shouldn't we try and work actively for freedom of China?
We should stand up for freedom. We should stand up for the Uyghurs that are in camps in Xinjiang. We should stand up for the Tibetans that are oppressed. But my problem is always there's so little that Europe can do because we can't even protect ourselves. So we have to protect ourselves first. We have to be strong first. And then we can change the world.
One of the three major disasters which has destroyed the world history so badly, and this is the 1917 October Revolution, the 1941 victory of the communists over China.
49,
yeah. And also then it was in 79, 30 years later, the Iranian Revolution of these extreme Islamists which took power. And these are the three most terrible events of the 20th century with toxic consequences leading to so much disaster. Especially in 49 it was possible to stop the Chinese communists, but unfortunately the Americans did do very little to protect they're called now nationalist Chinese in our communist historic historiography, but basically the free China we have betrayed in 49. Was that a major mistake?
Probably.
Chiang Kai-shek.
I think Chiang Kai-shek himself also made many mistakes along the way. I think the united front with the communists against the Japanese was difficult. There are people saying, the Japanese, they're just the flu, but the communists are the cancer. I think he made some mistakes along the way. I think the Americans could have done definitely more. But for Taiwan, history has turned out so far very well for the people of Taiwan. I think one thing to also recognize about Chiang Kai-shek that he's not a hero entirely. I think he committed terrible crimes when he was dictator in Taiwan. His government murdered 18,000 people in 1947 on 3 or 4 days. So they were brutal dictators. There was a personality cult. He had very close ties to Nazi Germany as well, and his son went there. So he's a complex figure, but overall, probably better than Mao Zedong.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have this book I read about this American general who was in the camp of Chiang Kai-shek, and they could have basically stabilized the front at the Yellow River and make South China independent. And it would have been a wonderful, different alternative history. Like in South Vietnam and South Korea, to have half of China in the free world in 49. But the Americans were not ready to confront Mao Zedong.
Yes, the Americans have always been realists in their core, I think.
Realist, egocentric.
They have always
sacrificing Eastern Europe and sacrificing China to the communists was probably the tragic mistake of the post-World War order.
But
giving them 2 seats in the UN Security Council was also quite generous.
It's we have to see the world as it is, and the Americans, they did great deeds for us. They liberated us from fascism, and they protected us through the Cold War. But their limit is always their own national interest, and right now their national interest is being redefined, and we are not so high on the order anymore, on the list anymore.
On the list of Witkoff,
yes,
J.D. Vance, and Jared Kushner. We are not very high on that one.
But you should really visit Taiwan.
I will.
You should, if you go, let me know. I can organize a trip for you.
Thanks a lot.
They're great people. It's a beautiful country. It's wealthy. People are happy. It's an open society. When you travel from China to Taiwan, all the barbed wire disappears. The closed doors disappear. These brutalist communist buildings disappear. You enter into, you can suddenly breathe again. People are smiling at you. People are polite. People are welcoming to foreigners. It's a booming economy. Every time you go to Taiwan, something gets better, and things change for the better. And the food is, to die for. It's the best food in the world. Only on desserts, Austrians are better.
That's
on
good.
desserts, I think we rule the world.
Yeah. Very good. When it comes to the question of comparing, because you said that Russia doesn't want Ukraine to be free and successful, and this is one of the reasons for the war. It's maybe very tempting to compare the analysis and this kind of comparison as well for China and Taiwan, because Mr. Xi sees the freedom of the spirit, the success of Taiwan, and he sees maybe that this is the role model for many of the young people in China. They see over there Chinese people can be free and successful, and then he thinks, oh no, this kind of island of freedom I have to crush.
I think that's a good analysis from you. It's one of the big reasons why he's doing it. The second big reason is this: it's a constructed obsession with Chinese unity. So, as we talked about before, Taiwan only became part of the Qing Empire in 1683. Before that, it was a sort of rugged island, some fishermen, some pirates, and then Dutch and Spanish colonizers. It became the west coast of Taiwan became part of the Qing Empire in 1683. The rest of the island was still unruled. So he has this idea that a strong ruler and a ruler that wants to enter history, he needs to unify the whole country. It's an obsession of Chinese. If a dynasty in China, so he still thinks like the emperors, if a dynasty in China does not manage to unify the country, it's a failed dynasty. And he doesn't want to be a failed dynasty. So it's much more than this kind of pragmatic thinking, that they are a threat to his power. It's deeply ingrained ideology, imperial ideology. And it's very hard to get out of his brain.
The Austrian Chancellor has announced a visit to China.
Yeah.
What's your message for him? What you would advise Mr. Stocker When he goes to China to supposedly improve our trade relations at this sensitive moment, do you think it's a good thing to do? Should he better visit Taiwan? Or what's your call for Mr. Prime Minister, Chancellor of Austria? I'm personally saying he shouldn't go. He should further go to Taiwan and not to China, because submitting to China just because we are angry on Trump is absolutely the wrong policy. And Europe should not sign any agreement in trade with the Chinese communists at this moment, but should further strengthen our alliance system with the Southeast Asian countries, with the Philippines and with Indonesia and with Malaysia. These are important countries for us, and he better visit them than submitting to the communist emperor of China, Mr. Xi.
Yeah, I mean, it's for me. If he wants to go, it's fine. He can go, but I think
He will probably not make it dependent on our approval
Yes.
in this podcast.
But I mean, it's okay. You know, I'm not angry at him. You know, for going to China. I just think it's a strange thing we are trying to do. So we are kind of pissed off with Americans, and we want to piss them off back, right? So we think if we go to China, it will make them feel uncomfortable, and they will suddenly respect us more, which is the totally wrong idea, because you're just showing how weak you are. You know, like one daddy says no longer supports you, you have to go to the next daddy. I think it's actually a play of a weak continent and of a weak Europe. I don't like this. It doesn't send the right signal for me. You know, it doesn't make me feel proud to be European. I think on trade, maybe there will be an agreement, but there's very little chance for something substantial emerging, because the interests are so different. For Canada, it's different because they sell oil, right? And China needs oil. China produces goods, Canada needs goods, it makes sense. For us, you know, we don't sell energy to China. What we sell to China are our cars, you know, our consumer products, and our industry sells to China. And China, through unfair trade practices, through subsidies and all the rest you know about it, they've created artificially cheap prices. So a liberation of trade between Europe and China would just mean that we get dumped more effectively with cheap Chinese products produced sold under their market value, and under these conditions, it's very difficult to make a good trade agreement. If we exclude cars, for example, but we say solar panels, fine. You know, we don't really have a substantial European industry of solar panels. We can get a few solar panels from China, power our energy transition. It's fine. But the total liberation of trade, or a kind of substantial trading agreement between Europe and China, that the conditions are just very difficult. And of course, we can never forget that China is supporting Russia in its war against us. And as long as they do that, relations will always be difficult. And you can see this. I mean, people travel to China all the time, everybody goes there, but very little comes out of it. And that's because the interests are still diametrically opposed. China doesn't really respect Europe. China wants the war against Europe by Russia to continue, so that the Americans are tied up there. So you can travel as much as you want. The question is, what can you get out of it, right? And I agree with you that these trading agreements with Southeast Asia, with India, and with Latin America, these are very important things that we have to pursue more vigorously.
For the same reasons, I declare China the enemy on my X account. Some people were upset, but realistically, after 4 years of war and the support for China, for Russia and Iran, we have to accept the facts that they are in the enemy camp, and we have to act accordingly. One of the things that the European Union has done recently, which was really remarkable, after 25 years, we have concluded a free trade agreement with Mercosur. It's already ratified now in the Argentinian parliament. The European Parliament actually has tried to postpone it, but in March it will be put in power by Ursula von der Leyen, who is very strict on that one, and she takes no nonsense, and she will implement that one. And also she has concluded a historic agreement with India. And as I have now this impression, she is really going by country. She's going to Australia now to conclude that one, and the French are basically sidelined now and their protectionism. Yeah. Unfortunately, Austrian protectionism, similar like Austrian xenophobia and anti-Semitism, is running high, and we are simply always on the wrong side of history when it comes to Ukraine, weapons for Ukraine, when it comes to trade, when it comes to America, when it comes to China. We are basically making everything always wrong. This is a kind of interesting analysis, I think, and I don't know exactly why. I tried to change that since 30 years, but seemingly it goes always contrary to my wishes, which I think are based on rationality and facts. So my question is, do you and your generation also support free trade agreements of the European Union, which in core is very much the essence of the European Union, because in core, legally, we are a regional trade integration body notified to the World Trade Organization under the GATT agreement. This is the essence of what we do. And unfortunately, it was never explained to the Austrian public, and seemingly some people here in Austria think that Mercosur is an enemy system or something, while behind it, it's the beautiful state of Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay and Paraguay, which I think most people in Austria would agree are very friendly and nice countries. Yeah? And after we have basically decoupled from the tyranny of Russia, it's now time to open to the rest of the world a little bit. But if you ask the Farmers Association of Austria, then you see the world very differently. And Arthur, explain me a little bit, why is the lack of information in Austria about the European Union, about our trade agreement, and why are we so protectionist? What's wrong in Austria?
That's a big question. I think economic history, if you take any lessons from economic history, is that countries that trade are richer than countries that don't trade. It's the one big lesson. If you trade and integrate overseas with your partners and allies, you will be
Sadly, we cannot send the whole Austrian population to WU Vienna or to LSE or to Oxford, but it
actually,
seems they have missed some basic lessons of economy here in Austria.
I think that my generation, we actually most of us, I think we support these trade agreements, but not so much from a economic perspective, but more from a sort of geopolitical perspective, right? That there's this feeling we have no friends anymore. You know, we are alone in this world. We are under threat from everywhere, so we need new partners. And because of this awareness, I feel most young people in Austria, we support free trade. There are always these particular interests, you know, the farming interests, which are of course important, environmental interests, which are also important, that have an, I think, outsized influence in Austrian politics because of our party structure, because it has these sub-organizations and stuff like this. So I feel that some interests are overrepresented in our politics, and the interests of the majority often are not heard. And the other thing, I think, also in the European Parliament, many of our MEPs voted against Mercosur, or for stalling Mercosur. And I feel like they feel like in the European Parliament, they can just do whatever they want and represent their interests, because nobody cares what happens in the European Parliament anyway, right?
That's not so good.
It's not good, and it's not good for the Parliament. It's not good for European democracy. So I think maybe if von der Leyen was now forced to cancel this agreement, and we could say in the next election for European Parliament that because of these MEPs we don't have this trade agreement now, I think maybe people would actually understand that their vote for the European Parliament matters. But because actually von der Leyen can't just overrule it, you can see how little power the Parliament has. So it's just some posturing, you know. I represent the interests of my political party and those interests that are represented in my political party, and I vote based on that. And the people don't care anyway. I think that's the dynamic that's happening. But in my generation, I feel there's a strong desire for Europe to look to the world, to find new friends, and conclude trade agreements and other kinds of agreements.
Yeah. Let's talk about EU enlargement, Arthur Kroen. Because
may I go around the corner quickly?
Yes, you can.
Can we take a break?
Definitely. You're welcome.
Because now we will continue.